The year is 1933. The Weimar Republic is gasping its last breaths. Its democratic ideals, once a beacon of hope, now seem like a cruel joke to millions of its citizens. The streets of Berlin are a theatre of chaos and despair. Political violence is a daily occurrence, a revolving door of chancellors who fail to command a stable majority in the Reichstag. The Republic had been haunted from its inception by the Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919. In this atmosphere of profound national anxiety, the German people were not just looking for a new policy, they were searching for a saviour. The psychological toll of the preceding years cannot be overstated. Trauma of war, shame of defeat, the relentless struggle for survival. On one side were the communists, inspired by the Russian Revolution. They promised to dismantle the capitalist system. The spectre of a communist takeover terrified the middle classes. It terrified business owners. It terrified the traditional elites. At the heart of this movement was a single, mesmerizing figure, Adolf Hitler. He was not a traditional politician. He was a charismatic orator, a master of political theatre. When he spoke, he did not engage in complex policy debates or nuanced arguments. He spoke the language of emotion, fear, hope, hatred. The core of Hitler's message was brutally simple. He broke the world down into a clear-cut struggle: friends, enemies, good, evil. This strategy of simplification rejected the complexities of democratic discourse. While Weimar politicians debated in Parliament, Hitler offered decisive black-and-white answers. The question at the center of our investigation is this: how did Adolf Hitler, after being legally appointed Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, transform a democratic republic into a totalitarian dictatorship in just a matter of months? This was not a military coup in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a revolution conducted from within, using the levers of the state itself to dismantle democracy. To understand this process, we must adopt a forensic approach. This documentary will not focus on the moral horror of the Nazi regime, which is well documented. Instead, our goal is to dissect the mechanics of power. We will examine the specific legal tools, political maneuvers, and psychological techniques that Hitler and the Nazi Party used to achieve total control. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. To the outside world, and to many within Germany, this appeared to be a normal constitutional transfer of power. There were no tanks on the streets, no violent overthrow of the government. Instead, Hitler arrived at the Chancellery in a civilian suit, taking his oath to uphold the Weimar Constitution. The appointment was the result of a backroom deal, a fatal miscalculation by the old conservative elite. Figures like the former Chancellor Franz von Papen believed they could use Hitler. The wolf had been let into the fold, disguised in the sheep's clothing of constitutional procedure. Less than a month after Hitler's appointment, on the night of February 27, 1933, a dramatic event occurred that would provide the perfect pretext for the seizure of absolute power. The Reichstag building, the home of the German parliament, was set ablaze. As flames engulfed the iconic dome and plenary chamber, a young, mentally unstable Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe was found inside the building. He was swiftly arrested and claimed sole responsibility for the act. For the Nazis, this was a gift from heaven. Before the ashes had even cooled, Hitler was on the scene, Goering was on the scene, immediately proclaiming the fire to be the work of the communists. They presented it not as the act of a lone arsonist, but as the signal for a massive nationwide communist uprising. The day after the Reichstag Fire, Hitler went to President Hindenburg with a prepared document. This document, officially titled the Verordnung des Reichspräsidenten zum Schutz von Volk und Staat, would become the legal foundation of the Nazi police state for the next 12 years. Hindenburg, an aging military man deeply fearful of communist disorder, and convinced by Hitler's panicked presentation, signed the decree. With the stroke of a pen, the rights to personal freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and the privacy of postal and telephone communications were declared null and void. The immediate aftermath saw a wave of terror unleashed against the left. On the same night as the fire, acting on pre-prepared lists, Göring's Prussian police forces began rounding up thousands of officials and members of the Communist Party. On March 23, 1933, the newly elected Reichstag convened in the Kroll Opera House in Berlin. The original Reichstag building was still unusable. The atmosphere inside and outside was thick with menace. The building was surrounded by a sea of uniformed SA men. Inside the hall, the aisles were lined with brown-shirted stormtroopers. This was not a free debate, it was a political act held under extreme duress. Hitler took the podium to argue for the law to remedy the distress of people and Reich, the enabling act. His speech mixed solemn promises with veiled threats. After Hitler's speech, Social Democrat leader Otto Wels spoke defiantly. It was the last free speech in the German parliament for 12 years. The vote was then taken. The final tally, 444 votes in favour, only 94 against. The German parliament had just voted to make itself irrelevant. The passage of the Enabling Act marked the completion of Hitler's legal revolution. He now possessed the authority to rule by decree, to create laws, to alter the constitution at will. In the weeks that followed, all political parties other than the Nazi Party were forcibly dissolved or pressured into voluntarily disbanding. Independent trade unions, once powerful, were abolished on May 2nd, their leaders arrested, their assets seized. They were replaced by the German Labour Front, which controlled the entire workforce. The federal structure of Germany was dismantled. One by one, state governments were taken over by Nazi loyalists and their autonomy eliminated. While the process of coordination dismantled organized opposition, the regime needed a mechanism to police the thoughts and actions of individual citizens. This role was filled by two of the most infamous organizations of the 20th century, the SS and the Gestapo. These were the primary instruments of fear, a dual apparatus of surveillance and terror. They ensured the German population remained subdued and obedient through the constant chilling threat of discovery and punishment. The Gestapo's effectiveness relied on creating a climate of pervasive fear that turned ordinary Germans into informers. Citizens denounced their neighbors, co-workers, and even family members for making critical remarks, telling political jokes, or listening to foreign radio stations. Fear of the anonymous letter or the knock on the door became the most effective tool for ensuring conformity. The mass arrests that followed the Reichstag Fire created an immediate problem: where to put thousands of political prisoners. The regime's solution was the creation of a new type of institution, the concentration camp. The first camps, established in spring 1933, were often improvised affairs set up in abandoned factories, workhouses, barracks. Dachau, near Munich, Oranienburg, near Berlin, were presented to the public as re-education centers for political opponents. This public justification masked a much grimmer reality. The camps were run by SS guards, deliberately trained to treat inmates as subhuman enemies of the state. The goal was to break prisoners' spirits, destroy their sense of human dignity, and make them an example to the rest of the population. By the summer of 1934, Hitler had eliminated all external opposition. However, a significant threat remained, one that came from within his own movement. The SA had been instrumental in Hitler's rise to power. Hitler had to choose between his street fighters and the professional military. He did not hesitate. The army was essential, the SA expendable. In the early hours of June 30th, 1934, Hitler launched the Night of the Long Knives. Using fabricated evidence of a Röhm putsch, Hitler flew to a lakeside hotel near Munich. He personally arrested his old comrade. Over a weekend, at least 85 people were executed. The real toll was likely higher. 2 weeks later, the government passed a law retroactively legalizing the murders. On August 2nd, 1934, just 1 month after the Night of the Long Knives, President Paul von Hindenburg died. Hindenburg was the last institutional check on Hitler's power. Hitler acted immediately. Within hours, the cabinet passed a law merging the offices of president and chancellor. Hitler was now the undisputed head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The most significant and sinister step came on the very day of Hindenburg's death. Every soldier and officer was now required to swear unconditional obedience, not to the Constitution, not to the country, but directly to the person of Adolf Hitler. I swear by God this sacred oath that I will render unconditional obedience to the leader of the German Reich and people, Adolf Hitler. The transformation of Germany from a fractious democracy into a monolithic totalitarian state was not the result of a single event, but the culmination of a systematic and multifaceted process. It was a machine built from interlocking parts, each one reinforcing the other. The first component was the masterful exploitation of a national crisis. The Weimar Republic's legitimacy was fatally wounded by the trauma of military defeat, the humiliation of the Versailles Treaty, hyperinflation, the Great Depression. The second critical component was the power of myth and message. The regime engineered a new reality through total control of information and culture. The third part, the weaponization of legality. Not a classic coup, but a revolution from within, under constitutional guise. The final component was the institutionalization of terror. With opposition removed, the regime consolidated power through fear. The story of how Hitler dismantled the Weimar Republic and engineered total rule is more than a chapter in German history. It stands as a timeless and forensic case study in the mechanics of democratic collapse. The institutions of a free society, its parliaments, its courts, its free press, are not self-perpetuating. They are fragile structures that depend on the commitment of both leaders and citizens to their underlying values. The German experience demonstrates a clear and repeatable sequence of failure. It begins with a crisis that shatters public faith in existing institutions and creates a hunger for a strong, decisive leader. Crucially, this leader uses the legal and constitutional tools of the democracy itself to systematically dismantle it, creating a facade of legitimacy that confuses and paralyzes opposition. The story of 1933 is a perpetual warning that democracy is not an endpoint, but a continuous process that requires constant vigilance, courage, and a collective refusal to sacrifice fundamental principles for short-term security. A democracy destroyed not by external invasion, but by internal submission to power without limits. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this study, hit the like and subscribe. See you in the next video.